If I tried to recall the days that were empty, would it be up to me to decide? Or would you mind if I chose to take a companion, someone to carry along for the ride? 'Cause if it's this or that or the other thing, why dwell on things that we can't know? If we're dangerously beginning, whoa, sing it, whoa, sing it, whoa, sing it, whoa, oh, 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 sing it, whoa.
Okay.
Sing it, whoa, sing it, whoa, oh, 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 oh. Yeah. We're doing a tight end.
All right. Let's thank everybody for coming in. I thought I would start this very first video not on rounding the earth with just a little bit of a throwback, a memory for myself. My name is Liam Sturgess. What you just saw was me and my buddy Braden Daggett, who goes by From Ash and Dust. And that was fun. That was a day where we were at the Nimbus School of Recording and Media, where I was attending back in 2020. And he came and a couple of family members joined us in one of these studios. And as you just saw, we did a bit of an acoustic jam session. And it was a ton of fun. So I'm finding myself in the last couple of days going through and just sort of thinking about where I've come from and where I want to be going now. And I'm excited. I am very excited because I think I might have scared some people when I told everybody that I was moving on from rounding the earth. Because a lot of people were saying, "Oh man, you've been really fun to have around this COVID thing, and it makes sense that you want to focus on your music." And look, it's true. I'm going to be spending more time on music than I've been able to before. However, I want to clarify something. I am most definitely not going away. So that's what today is, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm excited. I'm going to experiment a little bit. But for the most part, I plan to continue doing the stuff that has been working. And now, fun fact, now you may be noticing, obviously, my background's different. This isn't rounding the earth anymore. And you may be thinking, Liam, you just went from a rounding the earth background to a background that looks awfully close to the rounding the earth background. And there's two things I'll say to that. First, that was an accident. Okay, three things. Second, I think there's nothing wrong with a little bit of a transition period. So instead of going from hard one thing to hard the other, expect to see a little bit of a transitionary period. The third thing, though, is that this background is very much related to the topic that we're going to cover today in this very first episode of a new series that I'm calling Microjourneys. And I'm going to explain a little bit more what that is over the course of time. But essentially, the name Microjourneys came out of a conversation I was having with my buddy Futch, who I mentioned before. And we were talking about this exact idea before it had a name, but we were also talking about how with music, you can go on essentially, everyone has their own larger journey that they're going through in life, but then you can pop in and out of other people's experiences in almost like micro journeys. And Futch stopped me and said, that's the name. So that's as simple as that story is. But I think there's a lot more to explore in that concept. So I'll just say really quickly a shout out to Gabe, who I see in the chat here on Rumble. Good to see you, Gabe. And I know he's got a show on the Meta Prep Education Group Locals channel coming up at 5 p.m. my time. So that's very exciting. And we're also streaming on YouTube, which is interesting. I haven't been there for a while in earnest because we sort of were kicked off through Rounding the Earth. But ladies and gentlemen, let's allow me to share with you the subject of my deep dive that I went through over the past week. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get this all set up nice. So the topic of today, do you like that blue, by the way? It's probably a bit too bright. I like it. There was this story that came out, and here's what happened. On Wednesday of this week, 2 days ago, May 24th, this story came to my attention through two different sources that do not usually consider themselves good bedfellows. First of all, I received a notification from none other than Truth Social, followed by a New York Times news alert shared by a member of a Bitcoin discussion group that I'm in. To paraphrase, the member noted, if the New York Times is trying to get me to pay attention to this, then something smells fishy about it. I agree. So let's explore this story and see what we can glean. Now, what am I talking about? So here's what happened. On Wednesday, Microsoft issued an alert. This alert was titled Volt Typhoon Targets U.S. Critical Infrastructure with Living Off the Land Techniques. Authored by Microsoft Threat Intelligence, the report describes a hacking of networks supporting critical infrastructure organizations in the United States. The source of the hack is named as Volt Typhoon, which Microsoft describes as a state-sponsored actor based in China that typically focuses on espionage and information gathering. In their view, Microsoft assesses with moderate this is a quote, by the way, assesses with moderate confidence that this Volt Typhoon campaign is pursuing development of capabilities that could disrupt critical communications infrastructure between the United States and Asia region during future crises. Now, I'm no tech wizard, and it will require a bit of a tech wizard to interpret the nitty-gritty of the report itself. And for that, well, I'll refer you, of course, to my buddy Gabriel at Libre Solutions Network. To be clear, I don't think he's done a specific report on this, but he's the guy I turned to ask about the story when I needed a little bit of explaining. So I highly recommend LibreSolutions.network, which I believe is his website URL. So shout out Gabe. I think it is fair to say, however, despite my not being able to interpret a lot of the technical stuff, the headlines that this story has generated are keen to frame this network infiltration as a direct attack on the United States from a group that has the backing of the Chinese government. Look no further than the headline offered by CNBC. We've got Microsoft warns that China hackers attacked U.S. infrastructure. Now, this report, beyond being something that you could call simply due diligence on Microsoft's part, I flipped my camera back around. That actually feels a lot better. Anyway, because this involves some of their equipment, it's some of the networks they help manage. So beyond just being something that it makes sense for them to put out, the story appears to be something that has alarmed the network of intelligence agencies known as the Five Eyes. This coalition of agencies published their own concurrent report at the same time as Microsoft, titled People's Republic of China State-Sponsored Cyber Actor Living Off the Land to Evade Detection, in which they elaborate on the more technical but still the national security implications of Microsoft discovery, though the report largely focuses on a set of instructions for how to identify and log potential malicious activity. Though they also caution against assuming any particular event that they might discover is malicious, which is quite a bit of a different tone than was struck by CNBC. Now, those Five Eyes nations, okay, the agencies that signed off on this joint cybersecurity advisory include the National Security Agency in the United States, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, all in the United States. Then you've got the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, the New Zealand National Cybersecurity Centre, and the United Kingdom National Cybersecurity Centre. Now, what I found immediately interesting about this report is that it is, in fact, a collaboration between the public and private sectors. Right off the bat, the report states private sector partners, I guess this was further back still, but the report states private sector partners have identified that this activity affects networks across U.S. critical infrastructure sectors, and the authoring agencies believe the actor could apply the same techniques against these and other sectors worldwide. Now, who are these private sector partners? They're listed on page 22 under acknowledgements, and they are Amazon Web Services Security, Broadcom, Cisco Talos, Google's Threat Analysis Group, Lumen Technologies, Mandiant, Microsoft Threat Intelligence, Palo Alto Networks, SecureWorks, SentinelOne, Trellix, and other industry partners. Now, this is not the first time in recent history that I myself have approached a cyber attack story with a skeptical eye. Back in March, I covered on Rounding the News the so-called Vulcan files, which accused a Russian state-sponsored tech firm of engaging in cyber warfare and disinformation campaigns on behalf of the Kremlin, the Russian government. That was titled Confession Through Projection, and it can be found on the Rounding the Earth Rumble channel. And of course, quick side note, as always, there are show notes available for this episode, which will be published on liamsturgess.substack.com and in my own locals channel. But all of that to come later. Just know that all of this work will be shown. So my focus is generally on looking at the flow of money and influence. As such, in that story, I examined the parties involved to try to identify conflicts of interest within the narrative, and I found them everywhere. The media outlets and the non-governmental organizations that produced the Vulcan files were heavily funded by several different agencies of the United States government, with an explicit focus around shaping the narrative on foreign affairs and human rights issues. Then, of course, came the flagship article from The Guardian, which tapped a tech company called Mandiant for comment. Mandiant is a subsidiary of Google, and it appears alongside its parent company's Threat Analysis Group on the list that I just went through of the companies that contributed to the Five Eyes report from this week. As I concluded in my report from the Vulcan files, this is important because of Google's long-standing collaborative relationship with governments in the United States and around the world, occasionally blurring the lines between military and commercial activities through projects like Google Earth, for example. But what about the rest of the private companies that contributed to the report? That's an excellent question, Liam, you might be asking. To what extent, I suppose the question is, to what extent do the private and public sector collaborate on matters of national security? That's like a good general question. But before we explore that further, let's first address the group blamed for the attack. So, we've got Volt Typhoon. Volt Typhoon is a code name used by Microsoft and the Five Eyes to describe a People's Republic of China state-sponsored cyber actor, quote unquote. Now, according to Microsoft, this group has been active since mid-2021 and has targeted critical infrastructure organizations in Guam and elsewhere in the United States. In this campaign, the affected organizations span the communications, manufacturing, utility, transportation, construction, maritime, government, information technology, and education sectors. So basically everything. But this is a very important point we got to get through. The name Volt Typhoon was made up by Microsoft rather than selected by the hacking group itself. Microsoft's report links to an explainer on their website that shows how the company's naming taxonomy works. So as you can see here, you've got a bunch of different countries or categories of group, and then various 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What is that? Pentagon? I don't know. Now, there are two parts to the naming scheme. The first, or rather the second name, the family name, as Microsoft calls it, is decided based on what kind of entity is being described. Those could be nation states, they could be financially motivated actors, private sector entities, influence operations, or so-called groups in development. The page helpfully uses China as an overt example. I quote, "In our new taxonomy, which by the way was introduced just in April of this year, a weather event or family name represents one of the above categories. In the case of nation state actors, we have assigned a family name to a country of origin tied to attribution, like Typhoon indicates origin or attribution to China." End quote. Now, other possible nations of origin that you could attribute one of these attacks to is Iran, Lebanon, North Korea, Russia, South Korea, Turkey, and Vietnam. You know, the bad guys. Sarcasm, of course. Now, as for the first half of the name, quote, "Threat actors within the same weather family are given an adjective to distinguish actor groups that have distinct TTPs, infrastructure, objectives, or other identified patterns," end quote. Hence, Volt Typhoon. So, in other words, Volt Typhoon is less of a group and more of a theory. It's a code name used to label a threat actor, whether or not sufficient intelligence exists to formally assert the nature of the organization or its participants. Same goes for the logo that I showed a little moment ago. This right here is not a logo that the organization themselves adopted. It was created, again, by Microsoft. So that's important. But to further complicate matters, folks, you've got other organizations that use entirely different code names to discuss this same group. SecureWorks, a company which we will revisit in a moment, uses the name Bronze Silhouette in their own statement, which they also released on Wednesday. But the only thing that Microsoft or the Five Eyes actually assert in this regard is that Volt Typhoon is, as a matter of fact, sponsored by the People's Republic of China. Though SecureWorks is a bit more direct, but again, we'll come back to that. So what all this means is that an independent research journey into Volt Typhoon is not possible in the way that I would usually approach it. Again, it's more of an idea or a theory than it is a firm group. Nonetheless, this is a task that Reuters took on in an article from Thursday titled "Fact Box: What is Volt Typhoon, the alleged China-backed hacking group?" Refreshingly, the article starts out by pointing out that nearly every country in the world uses hackers to gather intelligence, with the United States and Russia in particular commanding, quote, large staples of such groups. This gets out of the way is sort of the main point of contention that I usually have with the kind of reporting we see around these things, which seems to go out of the way to paint these covert cyber activities as being something that only the bad guys do, which it's clearly not. But this veneer of what I had hoped would be objectivity quickly shifted into speculation over intentions and potential plans behind the hacking operation, most immediately tying it to the, quote, escalating tensions between China and the United States over Taiwan. After all, they argue, any conflict between those two countries would almost certainly involve cyber attacks across the Pacific. Now, while the article does acknowledge that Microsoft was only moderately confident it knew what it was talking about, it was all too happy to endorse the unsubstantiated accusation that China was using this campaign in order to prepare for a more direct, more intense cyber attack. And by unsubstantiated, I want to be clear, I'm not saying it doesn't make sense or it's not a reasonable assumption. The aforementioned SecureWorks, that company, is a subsidiary of Dell Technologies. Its Wednesday report on Bronze Silhouette describes how the company had previously encountered intrusions from the group in June of 2021, September 2021, and June 2022. They concluded that the group, quote, likely operates on behalf of the PRC, opining that the targeting of U.S. government and defense organizations for intelligence gain was consistent with China's priorities. Mark Bernard, the company's lead China researcher, suggested to Reuters that China may well be positioning itself for disruption. Cisco, another tech company, their contribution to the article is that it has seen disturbing evidence that Volt Typhoon was readying itself for something dangerous. Now we've had the word dangerous inserted. Now, this is getting more and more menacing seeming, of course. So let's look at this headline. This headline right here. U.S. State Department warns China could hack infrastructure, including pipelines, rail systems. Little on the nose there, that whole rail system issue. And not far behind it, of course, was cyber attacks on the rails or on the pipelines and issues with gas and oil. Like, these are all very serious issues at play. And it strikes right to the heart of the matter. China could really mess up people's days in ways far worse than just having their data stolen, which we're all sort of used to at this point. However, in a prime example of a blink and you'll miss it narrative shift, this article used to read something entirely different. I snapped this screenshot of the headline from the article as it was on 3:23 p.m. Pacific time yesterday. But if you had read the article at 4:43 a.m. yesterday morning Pacific time, you would have seen this. China rejects claim it is spying on Western critical infrastructure. This is what it looked like yesterday later in the day. This is what it looked like much earlier in the day. You'll see that this newer version has 3 authors. This first version has no authors. Wow. Now, the other thing about this article was, as you can tell, the headline initially, as it suggests, the article focused on China's response. The first paragraph was the official rebuttal from Chinese spokesperson Mao Ning, who described the joint warning issued by the United States and its allies a collective disinformation campaign. But in this new version, the focus shifts entirely to front-loaded warnings from the United States Department of State that China was capable of launching cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, including oil and gas pipelines and rail systems. Now, Ning's reply is still in this article, but it's far less visible, and it certainly will result in fewer readers even knowing China had articulated a reply, because instead of being the first part, it's now 3/4 of the way down, and the headline just completely changes focus. You've got one URL that has not changed, but 2 stories. It's sort of crazy how this works, and you really do have to be in the right place at the right time to even notice that it's happening. I got lucky. But now that the basic story has been set, speculation becomes fact through reporting and re-reporting over the course of the day like a game of telephone. The result is the seeding of this narrative that China has been caught hacking into critical U.S. infrastructure, through which they have planted seeds for an increasingly likely cyber attack that will cripple communications, travel, or the economy in general in some explosive form. As I always note, I have no doubt that China would benefit greatly from such an attack and likely are engaging in or working towards such a thing. But the notion that this story serves as proof of these allegations taken to the end that they've been brought to already, that all remains speculation based on everything that I have seen so far. Now, another thing that I'm sure will be lost on a lot of people is the fact that this report was not generated independently and then substantiated by a separate group. Now, what I mean is this. For example, one might assume that Microsoft, which is a private corporation, led the charge on breaking the news, which an appreciative intelligence community, a coalition of public agencies, validated with their subsequent statement. The same, hypothetically, of course, could work vice versa, where the intelligence community identifies what it sees as a potential threat in its realm of international security and operations, then hires a private corporation like Microsoft in order to apply their technical expertise to fill out the body of evidence. But that's not what happened. Neither of those accurately characterize what did in fact occur. Instead, the public and private sectors from the get-go worked collaboratively to investigate and respond to this incident, acting in tandem in their communications and their recommendations. As previously mentioned, Microsoft's report directly points to the Five Eyes' own advisory, which itself was generated in partnership with Microsoft and half a dozen, other big tech giants. So, let's look closer at this. We see here the NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. And indeed, this Five Eyes report was generated through this collaboration center, which was established in 2020 to engage with industry partners, share information on nation-state cyber threats, and develop strategies to counter these threats. It focuses on bi-directional information sharing between the NSA and the more than 250 participating companies. Now, it was launched in 2020, but apparently it was conceived in 2019 by Anne Neuberger, former head of the NSA's Cybersecurity Directorate and now current Deputy National Security Advisor in the Biden White House. A June 2021 article from Reuters noted that the center was opened after a series of high-profile attacks over that past year, including a massive cyber attack that penetrated numerous federal agencies and another that crippled a major U.S. gas pipeline. We mentioned that just moments ago. Now, the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center is so important, it seems, as a mechanism to skirt, this is where the quote starts here, okay, legal restrictions that prevent the NSA and other federal spy agencies from collecting data on domestic computer networks. They're saying it. Which companies are part of this public-private relationship, you might ask? Well, tough luck. The agency declined to identify companies participating in the center and did not commit to naming them in the future. Furthermore, everything that they do is protected by non-disclosure agreements between all the parties. So, good luck trying to be a fly on that wall. But luckily for us, we do have at least some idea who participates in the center because they are listed here in the acknowledgement of the Five Eyes report. So let's focus on just a couple of the lesser known companies, or, more specifically, perhaps lesser known groups, because Google certainly isn't a lesser known company, but perhaps its threat analysis group, or TAG, is. This April 2020 blog post titled How to Avoid COVID-19 Online Scams describes the group as a specialized team of security experts that works to identify, report, and stop government-backed phishing and hacking against Google and the people who use their products. But it's more than just a source of good cybersecurity advice from your run-of-the-mill techies. The author of that post, this How to Avoid COVID-19 Online Scams post, is Shane Huntley, and he is the head of the threat analysis group, which the Wall Street Journal describes as Google's in-house counter-espionage group. TAG is staffed partly by former government agents and is described as Google's version of similar groups that also exist within Facebook and Microsoft. Heck, with the Twitter files, one might argue, Twitter as well. According to Huntley, his team is primarily focused, or rather particularly interested these days, in preventing disinformation from spreading on its platforms, which it accomplishes by leveraging user data from services like Gmail. In the summer of 2018, they squashed an allegedly, this is the quote, an allegedly Iranian-backed disinformation campaign by pulling dozens of YouTube channels that were using fake accounts to push misleading political stories, primarily about the Middle East. That sentence is a mouthful because, okay, an allegedly Iranian-backed disinformation campaign. Thing number one. Point of unsureness number one. Two, they pulled these channels that are using fake accounts. And it occurred to me as I was reading this that I'm not sure what a fake account even means. Like, what is a fake account? Not, by all accounts, pun intended, I suppose, just an account that's being run deceptively, but that wouldn't make it a fake account. That would make it a fraudulent use of an account, I suppose, which then is further kind of undermined by the idea that they were pushing not fake stories, not defamatory stories, misleading political stories. Now, I wonder what else these same entities would put into the category of misleading political stories. I digress. That's that group. Feeling good so far? Well, let's look at another. Another one that I thought was interesting was, let's see, Palo Alto Networks. It's an American multinational cybersecurity company based in Santa Clara, California. I had previously come across this company in passing during my research on the Malala Fund, which is a nonprofit organization to which Palo Alto Networks is a donor alongside Apple, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Meta, the Musk Foundation, Open Society Foundations, the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and TikTok, among others. So that's the benefit of the Campfire Wiki, which everybody should go visit, campfire.wiki. We're getting ready to refocus our attention as a group in Operation Uplift to making full use of this wonderful resource, and I highly recommend you do the same. Now, let's look at this. What I didn't know about Palo Alto Networks, was really anything apart from this Malala Fund connection, but I found that this company's leadership has a strong representation of former Google employees. A fun coincidence. This includes the CEO and chairman Nikesh Arora, Chief Business Officer Amit Singh, Chief People Officer Leanne Hornsey, and last but not least, board member Lorraine Toohill, who currently serves as Google's Chief Marketing Officer. So still works at Google. Google's an influential company, it seems. Then there's board member Helen Gale, who spent 20 years with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, working primarily on HIV/AIDS, like really every single person I've looked at over the past several weeks of my deep dives. Ultimately becoming the director of the CDC's National Center for HIV, STD, and Tuberculosis Prevention. She also worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, directing programs on HIV, AIDS, and other global health issues. Her portfolio also includes a board seat within pharmaceutical company Organon and positions with a number of other prolific nonprofit organizations, including the Brookings Institution, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, New America, and the One Campaign. Now, those are all excellent candidates for groups that you should go look up on the Campfire Wiki. Let me just put it that way. Now, this is going to be a bit of a hard pivot. It's really easy these days, especially when we see headlines like this, to blame the World Economic Forum for everything. Now, this is a CBC News article that reads, "Can the Great Reset really create a gentler, more equitable capitalism? It's time for a new kind of capitalism that's not just about making money," says Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff, and member of the steering, board of trustees for the World Economic Forum. This is from 2 days ago. Now, despite the ease with which we could blame everything on the World Economic Forum, and people often do, it is certainly true that the non-governmental organization of the WEF, holds significant sway over the most pressing policy decisions of today. This, for example, is the, what do they call it? The intelligence tool or something, strategic intelligence tool that the World Economic Forum has available on their website, where you can go and it's interactive and you can move things around and you can sort it through the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, number 17, which is Partnerships for the Goals. And just some examples of the items around this fun little circle. We've got oceans, Africa, oil and gas, water, agile governance. We'll have to come back to that one. Climate change, digital communication, civic participation, global governance, and so on. The United States is also on here. Notably, though, the WEF, as suggested with this graph here, is the world's biggest proponent of public-private partnerships. It's not a hard concept to grasp. Public-private partnerships are collaborations between governments and the private sector that are ostensibly intended to improve the status quo for people in their own country and worldwide. Among the WEF's many publications on the subject are, let's see, we've got from April 21st, 2013, Strategic Infrastructure, Steps to Prepare and Accelerate Public-Private Partnerships. So again, 10 years, they've been talking about this for a long time. In January 2020, we've got public-private partnerships are the key to tackling climate change. Here's why. December 16, 2021. So in the COVID era, public-private partnerships for health access, best practices. And of course, we've seen many examples of how public-private partnerships are becoming the new norm for health and pharmaceutical and medical device and everything. And finally, of course, let's see, we got, strengthening public-private cooperation with civil society from January of this year. And most relevant for today's topic, data and public-private partnerships are the future of cybersecurity. So, surely it's no coincidence then that Amazon, Cisco, Google, Microsoft, Palo Alto Networks, Trellix, and SecureWorks' parent company, Dell Technologies, are all partner organizations of the World Economic Forum. Of course, these organizations I've just listed for you are the partners that are acknowledged in the putting together of this Five Eyes intelligence report on Void Typhoon. Now, furthermore, Amazon, Cisco, Microsoft, Palo Alto Networks, and Dell are also members of the WEF's Partnership Against Cybercrime, sitting alongside government agencies like the European Commission, Europol, the FBI, Interpol, Israel National Cyber Directorate, the Ministry of Communications and Digitalization of Ghana, the UK's National Crime Agency, the United States Department of Justice, and the US Secret Service. According to its webpage, the Partnership Against Cybercrime brings together a dedicated community, including leading law enforcement agencies, international organizations, cybersecurity companies, service and platform providers, global corporations, and leading not-for-profit alliances to implement key recommendations by promoting joint research and operations processes to support and facilitate operational public-private cooperation to disrupt cybercrime. But as seen with the NSA's Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, public-private partnerships can also be used as a euphemistic tool to erode the barriers that are meant to protect citizens from overreach by both government and private companies. Where legal boundaries exist for the public sector, these partnerships that we're talking about allow them to tap the private sector to accomplish a given task and vice versa. Again, this is not purely theoretical. This was the self-described basis for the opening of the NSA's Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. Again, that'll be in the show notes. But there's another word that's often thrown around to describe this melding of state and corporate power and interests. It's a rather loaded word, in fact. Fascism. Now, not everyone agrees on what the formal definition of fascism is or how it should be applied here. But to quote American political scientist and historian Robert Paxton in his reflections on fascism through modern history, fascism redrew the frontiers between private and public, sharply diminishing what had once been untouchably private. It changed the practice of citizenship from the enjoyment of constitutional rights and duties to participation in mass ceremonies of affirmation and conformity. It reconfigured relations between the individual and the collectivity so that any individual had no rights outside community interest. It expanded the powers of the executive, party, and state in a bid for total control. Finally, it unleashed aggressive emotions hitherto known in Europe only during war or social revolution. It's funny, war and social revolution. I kind of feel like we're at least told we're going through versions of those right now. But the WEF isn't just some unelected interest group with a lot of rich backers gallivanting in Switzerland. It is that, but it also simultaneously acts as a formal partner with the United Nations, the closest thing we got to a world government, to, quote, deepen institutional engagement and jointly accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, codified in a strategic partnership framework signed between the two organizations in June 2019. Here in this picture, we have Herr Klaus Schwab, the chairman of the World Economic Forum, beside, I can't remember his first name, Mr. Gutierrez, I believe, who is the Director General of the United Nations, or the Secretary General, perhaps. So it ain't nothing. And look, in the end, my message to you today is largely the same that I would come to by the end of most of my episodes of Rounding the News, particularly over the last 3 months or so. The truth is never as simple as can be presented in a headline. Any headline. Particularly in the case of geopolitical stories like this one, there's no reason to give the benefit of the doubt to either side of the conflict. The fog of war and all that. The United States and its collective West allies have a long history of interfering in the autonomy of foreign governments, just like China and Russia do. It is not some new premise that one side or the other engages in infiltration and deception. It's both. Furthermore, people surely are not so naive as to suggest that our own governments, read our side, could be the instigator in a given conflict. Could not be the instigator in a given conflict. Or maybe it's even more complicated than that, with neither side truly operating as an objective antagonist. It seems reasonable to me that the act of engaging in self-empowerment of any sort is an inherent threat to competitors. As the more powerful a nation becomes, so too does the other become more at risk, in theory. On the other hand, it becomes more and more plausible every day that the most pressing threat to the safety and liberty of a given community is not the actions of a foreign nation, but instead the overt, self-evident, and enthusiastic push to dissolve the lines between public governments and private corporate interests. If public institutions like healthcare, law enforcement, the military, the regulatory agencies continue to get cozier and cozier with pharmaceutical companies, big tech giants, energy producers, and the news media, especially at the rate that we're going, it can only result in the total destruction of individual privacy, cyber or otherwise, bodily autonomy, freedom of expression, and other God-given, non-derogeable human rights. It's a good word that my friend Gail Davidson taught me. Now, look, dear viewer, you and I won't solve this China-US tension situation overnight. But as usual, Let this story serve as a reminder that there are legitimate reasons to openly engage topics like this with friends and family as they come up. This helps us keep each other informed, but it also helps us to build on each other's knowledge and more quickly get to the facts of a given situation. From there, we'll disagree a lot of the time on interpretation and what each person feels is the right way or the wrong way to handle something. But that's not a problem. That's part of the process of learning and of building and strengthening relationships. And through those strong relationships, we remain happy, healthy, and ready to face a brand new day tomorrow. Now, speaking of a brand new day, allow me to share with you a song of mine bearing that very same name. So, just a bit of backstory. Just prior to the COVID era, I began dipping my toes as a musician into a genre that was new to me called progressive house, so I'm told. Electronic music has never been my primary focus, but I have been a huge fan of a guy named Avicii, the late Avicii, rest in peace, for a few years, and I was delighted to learn that he fell into this genre. The process of working on these progressive house songs is different than my usual process. Instead of me imagining a melody or lyrics and then building the music on my own around that idea, I instead, when I work on these songs, receive a near complete instrumental from my progressive house collaborators. Hearing that music for the first time, I often immediately identify a lyric or a melodic starting point, and then I just start writing. They're often very inspirational and very talented people. And so the result is a progressive house track featuring me as the singer. And Brand New Day is just such a track. It was created by a young Slovenian producer named Paxis, and it's an inspiring tune, I think. And I had the honor of having it selected to play at my graduation from recording school, the Nimbus School of Recording and Media, at the end of 2020. Side note, I didn't actually attend that online ceremony, but that's another story for another day. You can check out, and I highly recommend you do, more of Paxis's work on SoundCloud, and you can purchase the song on your platform of choice. It should be available in all your favorite spots. Now, I'm going to play this song as our celebratory ending. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you all have a fantastic week. I will see you again very shortly. You turn us around as the fog rolls down, lost in a haze never found, with sweat on my brow and heart in the cloud. I lose my faith in tomorrow, broken in pieces on the ground. If the ground is a viable place to lie alone, then what would it take to make the rise our home? 'Cause we're going up, it's my call to live against you. I'm too big to fit in your shoes. Let your heart loose and feel me as I choose to live differently in a brand new day.
ticking of time, I've heard it all along. The days and years counting down. My head in the clouds, I'll dream easy now. No matter the fears of tomorrow, I close my eyes and whisper your name. If the sound is a wave, then the shore is the stage curtains drawn. And what would it take from cradle to grave to shine? It's my call to live against you. I'm too big to fit in your shoes. Let your heart loose and feel me as I choose to live differently. It's my call to live against you. I'm too big to fit in your shoes. Let your heart loose and feel me as I choose to live.